Hello, thank you for coming. I'm pleased to present the very first collaboration between the Poetry Society of America and Hauser and Wirth for this exhibition, this special event for our Mira Schendel exhibition, which I hope you all visited downstairs and this floor. So with me is Charles Bernstein. He is, most of you might know him, he is professor of English and Comparative Literature at the University of Pennsylvania and a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Science. And his most recent collection of critical essays is Pitch of Poetry, and his most recent collection of poetry is All the Whiskey in Heaven. Love the title, by the way, selected poems. And on my other side is Sergio Bessa. You might also be familiar with him. He is the Bronx Museum's director for curatorial and education programs. Especially noteworthy here is the translator of Haroldo de Campos, which must be a very difficult task from Brazilian Portuguese to English. Novas selected writings, very good. And I also want to have a special thank you to the deputy director of the Poetry Society of America, who I haven't met yet, but I know he's here. So hello. Oh, hi. Okay. Well, thank you much. And without further comment, I leave you both with your, I think this might, oh no, that's fine.
Thank you. Thank you so much for such a nice introduction. So Charles and I know each other for quite some time. The last time we collaborated was 17 years ago. Mm-hmm. We are getting old. And we have mutual respect. I love Charles' work, but also Charles has always been such a big supporter of the work of translators, and he's very interested in what's going on in Brazil. So for tonight, we met and we had some email exchange, and what we are going to do is we selected the work of some poets that were very productive during the time that Mira was working in Brazil, which is from the 50s. Actually, one of the poems of Drummond is from the 30s, I believe. Yeah. But anyways, it kind of crosses all those decades. And I will do just a little bit of an introduction between this very special relationship that Mira had with Haroldo de Campos. Mira, as you know, she was born in Switzerland, and after traveling in Europe for quite some time during the war, she made the wise decision of going to Brazil. And she went first to the very south of the country in Porto Alegre, and where she had sort of a beginning career as a designer of mostly books, covers for books and things like that. And then within a few years, Olivier is here, he can tell all this story better than I, but I will just say very sketchy. But she ended up in São Paulo, and for good luck, or whatever you want to call, she got in touch with some of the greatest people in Brazil in the 50s. And one of these folks was Haroldo de Campos, who had a lot of respect for Mira's work. And he actually thought that Mira was a poet. He thought that what Mira was doing was poetry. So the work that we see here in this exhibition actually is sort of less language-oriented. I think the other exhibition that we had, it was about 2 years ago. It was very language kind of infused, but we still have some elements here in the galleries that kind of relate to her interest in language. One thing that I find about her work is that language for her was everything, in the sense that nature, she saw nature as language, which I think is such a kind of interesting thing. Reminds me a lot of Roland Barthes, for example. Roland Barthes, he wrote at some point that trees is an alphabet. And I think for Mira, nature was an alphabet. And I think these drawings here, that it's kind of on the verge between sort of landscape drawings and notations, some kind of an alphabet. It's kind of a very interesting way to think about her work. But I was also very struck by these 4 drawings here, which they're so abstract, but they come very close to be language, sort of an alphabet. So you can see an inverted D or an O, and this is how far she kind of pushed her relationship with language. And Haroldo was a really good kind of interlocutor with these kind of questions that Mira had. And I read in an interview that sometimes it seems that Mira was assaulted by, thoughts and dreams, and she would stay up until very late at night, and sometimes they would have phone conversations in the middle of the night. That's how close they were. And the final analogy, and then I want to read a couple of things that I want to make, is the interest in cosmology. And in this gallery here, now it's kind of hard to see, but there is a beautiful little painting here that I wish it was mine. Olivia, just to let you know. But it's actually a scene of the sky with the stars. And in the last show, we had some of these drawings that Mira did with the alphabet, and the alphabet creating constellations and galaxies. And actually, one of the drawings of Mira was used by the De Campos family to illustrate the cover of Galaxias, which was Haroldo's really awesome collection of poems, which kind of marked a sort of a turn in his career, and I'm going to talk about these poems later. But they're interested in cosmology and cosmogony, or whatever you want to call. It's very interesting when you think in terms of Haroldo de Campos, because that actually became a trope of writing. And there are 2 influences there. There is one that it's this art critic and physicist living in São Paulo at the time called Mira Schendel. And he was very close to both of them, and he was a big supporter of Mira Schendel. And, but in terms of Haroldo, it actually goes back to the 17th century in Brazil, to a Jesuit missionary who wrote these amazing texts that everyone in Brazil who's interested in literature have to go back to his sermons. And there is one particular sermon that Haroldo references in his very first book of poetry. And the title of this book is called Xadrez de Estrelas, in Portuguese, which means star chess. And so what I want to just read a couple of sentences from an essay that I published recently. Actually, it's about to come out, but has to do with this idea of galaxies, cosmology, the cosmos, the universe, as a trope for writing. So just bear with me for a second. So when Haroldo published, when Haroldo published Galaxias, the Galaxias he started writing in the late 60s, and he kept going until the mid-70s, and then at some point he published the entire collection of poems. And then later he did a second edition in which he wrote about his process of writing those really interesting, difficult texts. And as one of his motivations, he actually mentions Roland Barthes, and I'm going to read just this very short text by Barthes. but says, in this ideal text, the networks are many and interact without any one of them being able to surpass the rest. This text is a galaxy of signifiers, not a structure of signifieds. It has no beginning, it is reversible. We gain access to it by several entrances, none of which can be authoritatively declared to be the main one. The codes it mobilizes extend as far as the eye can reach, and he goes on and on and on. Now, this was one of the sources of influence for Haroldo, but the other, as I mentioned, I have to lean here, otherwise I'm gonna trip. The other one was the work of this Jesuit missionary called Antônio Vieira. And the impact of Vieira is mostly from this sermon that he wrote in, when was that? In 1655, and he presented this in a chapel in Lisbon. And that's very interesting because Vieira was this Portuguese priest who went to Brazil as a missionary. He lived in the Northeast. A lot of his brothers were killed by native Brazilians. And he goes back to Portugal to talk about how missionaries should do their work better. And the way that he says that the work needs to be better is actually taking care of language, addressing language. So it's in this sermon that he uses this analogy of the star of chess. And I will just read a couple of sentences for it. He says, stars, so Vieira says, he's very kind of upset with the kind of style that comes from Spain, that it's very Baroque and very ornate. And he asks for a style that is more simple. And he says, let's learn from the stars. And, you know, it's very complicated too, right? But he says, stars are distinct and clear. Thus ought to be the style of preaching, distinct and clear. And do not fear that your style, when you speak this way, might sound like the low style. Stars are very distinct, very clear, and the highest order. Style can be very clear and high, so clear that those who do not know will understand, and so high as to offer something more to those who already know. The rustic finds in the stars directions for farming, and the sailors for navigation, and the mathematician for observations and judgment. There is the rustic and the sailor who cannot read or write understands the stars. So he goes on and on about this analogy of learning from the cosmos and structuring your speech in that manner. So this is all that was sort of behind Haroldo de Campos' interest in sort of creating a style that it was very kind of mobile-like, that we could enter from any point, that it was not straight lines, but it was very open and very mobile. So I will just read a couple of poems from the Galaxies. And Charles asked me actually to read one in Portuguese. So if you just stay with me. It's, if you don't understand Portuguese, it's a little bit hard, but I think the sound is quite nice.
It becomes the cosmos if you don't understand it.
Yeah, I'm just going to read a few lines just for Charles. So the first poem, it's actually a play with a word in one of the sermons by Vieira. Vieira uses this word, o dia da messe, it's the day of harvest. And you're gonna hear this word, this sound of and this kind of sounds. So this is how it goes. E começo aqui, e meço aqui este começo, e recomeço, e remeço, e arremesso, e aqui me meço, quando se vive sob a espécie da viagem, o que importa não é a viagem, mas o começo, dá por isso meço, por isso começo, escrever 1000 palavras, escrever 1001 páginas, para acabar com a escritura, para começar com a escritura, para acabar, começar com a escritura. E por isso recomeço, e por isso arremesso, e por isso teço. Escrever sobre escrever é o futuro do escrever. Sobre escrevo, sobre escravo, em 1001 noites, 1001 páginas, e uma página em uma noite, que é o mesmo noites e páginas, mesmam em si mesmam, and goes on and on and on. So it's a whole page. So I will read the translation that we published in Haroldo's book that we published here in the US. And this translation is by Suzanne Gilles Levine. And I just want to say how hard it is to translate Haroldo. You just heard the original in Portuguese. So Jill had to find equivalents, both to the meaning of the poem, but also to the sound. And she decided to go to a Cole Porter song called Begin the Beguine, as you know. And then you have this multitudes of B's, so it's B, 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 which for me doesn't work very well, but I will read, and you know, it's up to you. I'm just giving my opinion here. So this is how it goes. And here I begin, I spin here the begin, I respin and begin to release and realize life begins, not arrives at the end of a trip, which is why I begin to respin, to write in 1,000 pages, write 1,001 pages, to end, write, begin, with writing, and so I begin to respin, to retrace, to rewrite, write on writing, the future of writings, the tracing, the slaving, 1,001 nights in 1,001 pages, or a page in one night, the same nights, the same pages, same resemblance, where the end is begin, where to write about writing, not writing about not writing. And so I begin to unspin the unknown, unbegin and trace me a book where all's chance and perchance, all a book, maybe not a travel, navel of the word book, a travel, navel of the book, word, where tripping's the book, and it's being the trip, and so I begin, since the trip is begin, and I turn and return, since the turning's respinning, beginning, realizing, a book is its sense every page, is its sense every line of a page, every word of a line is the sense of the line of the page of the books, which essays, any book, any essay of essays of the book, which is why the begin, ends, begins, and end spins, and re-ends and refunnel of the begun spun into the run end in the end of the begin end refines the refined of the final, where it finished, beginish, reruns and returns, and the finger retraces 1,000 stories in an icy wins story, and so count of no account. I don't recount, the non-story uncounts me, discounts me. The reverse of the story is snot cannot be rot. Maybe a story depends on the moment. The glory depends on the now and the never, and although and no go and nowhere and no place and nihil and nixit and zero and zilchit, and never can nothing be all, can be all, can be total sum, total surprising summation of sumptuous assumption. And here I respin, I begin to project my echo, the wreck or recurrent, echo of the echoing blow, the hollows of morose, the marrow, that's beyonder, the over, the this way, that way, everywhere, neverwhere, overwhere, over there, forward, more backward, less there, in reverse, vice versa, prosa converse. I begin, I respin, verse, begin, vice, respin, so that summated story won't consummate, salting boca, bestride, me, bare backbone, beride, me, begin the begin of the trip, where the travels, the marvel, the scrabbles, the marble, the vigils, the travel, the trifle, the sparkle, the embers of fable discount into nothing, account for the story, since it's spinning, beginning, I'm speaking. So this is the first of the galaxias. Should I read another one? Sure. This is the translation that I did. I'm not going to read the whole one. As you see, it's very kind of repetitive. But this is it's probably the most well-known of the galaxias because it was put in song by Caetano Veloso. And it actually was this kind of a surprising hit in Brazil. It played on the radio and so forth. And in Portuguese, it's circulador de fulô. And the word circulador has always been a little bit of a riddle because you don't know if it means a spinner or if it means to be surrounded by. And I opted for the second meaning, to be surrounded. And I shorten, instead of surrounded, I write here, rounded. So I'm just going to read half a page of it. Rounded by flowers, under God's and the devil's mercy, God shall guide you, for I myself can't guide. God bless those who give, rounded by flowers, and those who are still to give, sounding like a samisen made of a tensed wire, a stick, and an old tin can, at the end of the party fair at high noon high. But for many, that music did not exist. It could not, because it could not pop play. If it's not sung, that music is not popular. If not in tune, it does not atone, no Tarantina. And yet, it struck in the gut of misery, in the tense gut of the meagerest physical misery, aching like a nail in the hand palm, a rusty blind nail in the palm, clasping palm of the hand heart, exposed as a tensed nerve, retensed, a renegrated blind nail, everlasting in the palm pulp of the hand in the sun, and so goes on and on and on. So these are two of the poems of Galaxias. So,
And
Charles,
that, it's a little bit like the circular shape, too, that we see there. Marjorie Perloff calls this late work of Haroldo de Campos concrete prose, because it isn't visual poetry in one sense, but it's an open prose form that continuously goes in kind of cosmic spirals and echoes. And it's great to hear Sergio's own translation. I was trying to get him to read as much Haroldo de Campos in Portuguese as possible, but the Caetano Veloso Circulado, which you can find actually on YouTube, is spectacular. It's one of the great settings of a radical poem of that kind.
if you like Caetano, it's great.
You don't like Caetano Veloso?
It's fine.
Oh, well. But
I like Caetano. Just kidding.
He's my favorite. A Foreign Sound is a beautiful one of his, of American standards. So Schendel is not a poet, perhaps, but her work might be seen in the context of visual poetry. Her alphabetic forms are not concretist in the sense of neat and in a grid, as the famous 50s poems of de Campos and others, but all over and layered, opening up a palimpsestic space inside the Mallarmé-sprung page. Her overlaying of linguistic fields evokes a lyric precariousness, a sense of the contingency of utterance. In her alphabetic works, printed letter forms are played against handwriting, and in some cases, handwriting evolves or dissolves into rhythmic patterning where individual letters can no longer be discerned. Or her scrawl is stretched over deep space, figures on top of a ground that is itself scratched and scored. The letters become graphic signs, as in the pieces in this room that Sergio mentioned right on my left, but without losing their linguistic charm. And indeed, she casts the space of a drawing as also the space of a page of a book. In other words, the process of inscription of lines in space takes on an autonomous dimension, as if words could dissolve into the impulse of rhythmic scoring of a page with proto-linguistic marks. Haroldo de Campos wrote for a collection that I edited for Boundary 2 of international poetry, 99 Poets, 1992, a sort of summary of what he thought was the context for reading and understanding Brazilian poetry. And to just mention a couple of signature and well-known things within a Brazilian context, Oswaldo de Andrade's Brazil Wood, 1924, and 1928, his Anthropophagite Cannibalism Manifesto, 1928. So that, I'm interested to see that here with this Schendel, because Andrade here is concerned about the export product in Brazil. Brazil Wood was a main export product, was taken out of Brazil and sent around the world, for example, to the United States. And he was concerned about that issue of Brazilian poetry and Brazilian culture losing its own internal autonomy through this issue of exploitation and extraction and export. And the Anthropophagite Manifesto, the Cannibalism Manifesto, is absolutely marvelous because it argues for the culture cannibalizing itself, not looking outside, not becoming international modernism. So when we see this explosion of Brazilian visual art, as often is the case, as with the abstraction show at the Museum of Modern Art that I write about in Picture Poetry a couple of years ago, inventing abstraction, you have a precarious splitting off of the poetry and the thinking around poetry with the visual art, which is sold as export product for a great deal of money, beautiful pieces. So I'm really happy to be talking about and reading some Brazilian poetry, especially with Sergio, who knows so much more about it than me. I know a little bit. De Campos was quite interested in this issue, of course. His great work in the 50s, the concrete poetry, was a curious phenomenon, an international poetry product, concrete poetry, because it could be looked at without being able to be understood. You even notice with Sergio, he is reluctant to place upon Americans the burden of hearing a language they don't know because of the kind of phobia of other languages that he is quite aware of. But the concrete poets managed to actually create an international poetry with concrete poetry. It was actually very successful in a way. There was no visual poetry in the United States that was successful in that way. But then he turned against it with the great work that you read, the Galaxias, and did a work that was internal to Brazilian writing and Brazilian Portuguese with the Galaxias. So he didn't stick with that in the 50s, but actually went against it. And he created this absolutely great term, transcreation, which is the word I like to use for translation, transcreation. And it was a great, really one of the great translation theorists or thinkers about what the nature of translation and exchange is, especially with these two poles. It was my great pleasure to know him a little bit. I met him in Coimbra, Portugal, and we were together in our house in New York, and we were together in New Haven, Yale conference, and I'll read something that he translated of mine soon. But I want now to give a happy announcement, which is that his brother, Augusto, who's still alive, Haroldo died very sadly a few years ago, but Augusto de Campos is right as we're speaking, or yesterday, been awarded the Janus Pannonius Grand Prize for poetry from Hungary, the Hungarian Pen Club, and he's right now in Budapest and Pest receiving that great honor with Marjorie Perloff and others there. So it's a great occasion for the de Campos brothers. And also mention, because the Caetano thing, just one of the great controversies is sort of interesting with Caetano doing that beautiful thing, that Augusto became a very controversial figure among the poets of my generation, and because he said at a certain point that it was really tropicalism that was what was interesting, not the poets. And this is a little bit like saying, as my friend Jesus Bonvicino would say, that it's really Bob Dylan that's interesting, not poetry, something that we can't imagine anybody saying. That was a joke, by the way. But actually, Jesus did mention that Bob Dylan. He's obsessed with Bob Dylan. But I think there was a lot of resistance to that idea of Augusto embracing, after this radical work that he did, the popular work of Tropicalismo. But Caetano Veloso is extraordinarily involved with poetry and comes out of and is very directly related to poetry. And actually, Haroldo and Augusto were the people he sort of introduced him to a literary life. He couldn't exist as a popular performer without the two of them. What I'm going to do now is to read a little bit of a kind of key works within Brazilian poetry that I have translated. So these happen to be the things that I've translated, but I think that you may enjoy them. The first is something that I published in The Nation a few years ago. It's by Cruz e Sousa. Cruz e Sousa is an Afro-Brazilian poet. The poem was 1898. He's often thought of as the Brazilian Baudelaire. And I think that this is really when we think about for example, what's going on with the protests among the football players today against Trump and company, the Republican Party. It comes to mind also this issue of racism and how to respond to it. And so this poem from 1898 is called Sacred Hate. I'm going to try my Portuguese for a second. You'll tell me how bad it is. Just for the two lines. Odio sacrado. Odio sacrado. O mio odio majestoso.
I'll do it. Okay. Ódio sagrado. O meu ódio majestoso, meu ódio santo e puro e benfazejo.
Oh, my hate, so majestic, saintly, pure, angelic, bless my excesses with fat caresses. Make me bow, make me proud, humiliated by humble generosity, proud to be living sans desire, sans goodness, sans faith, outside radiant sun's loving rays. Oh, my hate, grandiloquent shield, agitate my soul to infinite zeal, beyond other harms concealed. Hate wins, hate resounds, armor against vile amour, that defrauds all the 7 deadly sins of my ardor. So that is 1898, Cruz y Sousa. 1928, perhaps the signature poem of Brazilian modernism, perhaps for the modernism of the Americas, much translated, but I did my own version, and we're going to read this stanza for stanza with the Portuguese and the English. It actually follows the syllable count exactly from the Portuguese. It's very close to it. It's in the middle of the way, no meio...
No meio do caminho.
No meio do caminho. Carlos Drummond de Andrade.
Carlos Drummond de Andrade.
That's what I said.
No.
Carlos, that's my name.
I'm just picking on you. This is a really major poem, and I always get so nervous when I kind of stumble at it. So, no meio do caminho. No meio do caminho tinha uma pedra. Tinha uma pedra no meio do caminho. Tinha uma pedra. No meio do caminho tinha uma pedra.
In the middle of the way was a stone. Was a stone. In the middle of the way was a stone. In the middle of the way was a stone.
Nunca me esquecerei desse acontecimento na vida de minhas retinas tão fatigadas. Nunca me esquecerei que no meio do caminho tinha uma pedra. Tinha uma pedra no meio do caminho. No meio do caminho tinha uma pedra.
Never. I'll never forget that happened in the life of my, oh, so wearied retinas. Never. I'll never forget that in the middle of the way was a stone, in the middle of the way. In the middle of the way was a stone. This is a poem that I translated this summer, another really much later, great poem also of Drummond, called in Portuguese Procura de Poesia, but I'm sometimes translated as Searching for Poetry. There's a number of translations of it, and John Yao did a wonderful kind of extension and improvisation on it called In the Middle of, in the Kingdom of Poetry. But I'm translating it more literally, perhaps, as procuring poetry. Procuring poetry. So we're going to read this sort of line for line so you can sort of hear the Drummond, perhaps, and what I have done to him.
So this poem is he's giving advice about, right?
Yeah, right, how to write a poem. It's kind of like a proto-MFA, how to write a good poem, what to avoid.
Yeah. Não faças versos sobre acontecimentos.
No fake verses about what's going on.
Não há criação nem morte perante a poesia.
No crying about death before creating the poem.
Diante dela, a vida é sol estático.
Compared to which life's a static sun.
Não aquece nem ilumina.
With no heat or illumination.
As afinidades, os aniversários, os incidentes pessoais não contam.
Affinities, anniversaries, or personal anecdotes don't matter.
Não faças poesia com o corpo.
No fake poetry with the body.
Esse excelente, completo e confortável corpo, tão infenso à efusão lírica.
An excellent, complete, and comfortable body, senseless for lyric expression.
Tua gota de bile, tua careta de gozo ou de dor no escuro são indiferentes.
Your spleen, your fits of pleasure or pain in the dark make no difference.
Nem me reveles teus sentimentos.
Don't share your feelings.
Que se prevalecem do equívoco e tentam a longa viagem.
Which reek of equivocation and beat around the bush.
O que pensas e sentes, isso ainda não é poesia.
What you think and feel, that is not yet poetry.
Não cantes tua cidade, deixa-a em paz.
No singing of your city, let it be.
não é o movimento das máquinas, nem o segredo das casas.
Songs, not machine music or family secrets.
Não é música ouvida de passagem, rumor do mar nas ruas junto à linhagem de espuma.
Not music heard in passing, nor rumors of sea on streets lined with spume.
O canto não é natureza,
Songs, not nature,
nem os homens em sociedade.
nor community.
Para ele, chuva e noite, fadiga e a esperança nada significam.
For poetry, storm and light, fatigue and fright are never important.
A poesia, não tires poesia das coisas.
Poetry, no taking poetry from things,
É lide sujeito e objeto.
elides subject and object.
Não dramatizes, não invoques,
No dramatizing, no invocations,
não indagues, não percas tempo em mentir,
no nagging, no wasting time lying,
não te aborreças.
no belaboring.
Teu iate de marfim, teu sapato de diamante,
Your ivory yacht, your diamond slippers,
vossas mazurcas e abusões
Your-
são esqueletos de família.
your fantasies and mazurkas, your family skeletons
Desaparecem na curva do tempo. É imprestável.
disappear in time's bends, insignificant.
Não recomponhas tua sepultada e melancólia infância.
No recasting your repressed and venal childhood.
Não osciles entre o espelho e a memória em dissipação.
No oscillating between mirror and disappearing memories.
Que se dissipou não era poesia.
What disappeared was no poetry.
Que se partiu, cristal não era.
What broke was no crystal.
Penetra surdamente no reino das palavras.
Penetrate stealthily words' dominion.
Lá estão os poemas que esperam ser escritos.
A poem is waiting to be written.
Estão paralisados, mas não há desespero.
It is paralyzed but feels no despair.
Há calma e frescura na superfície intacta.
Calm, fresh, with membrane intact.
Ei-los sós e mudos em estado de dicionário.
Mute and brute, immaculate as in a dictionary.
Convive com teus poemas antes de escrevê-los.
Let your poems live with you, then write them.
Tem paciência se obscuros. Calma se te provocam.
Be patient with obscurity. Calm down when provoked.
Espera que cada um se realize e consume com seu poder de palavra e seu poder de silêncio.
Wait for each to be realized, consummated with the power of words and with the power of silence.
Não forces o poema a desprender-se do limbo.
No forcing a poem out of limbo.
Não colhas no chão o poema que se perdeu.
No picking up a lost poem from the floor.
Não adules o poema. Aceita-o como ele aceitará a sua forma definitiva e concentrada no espaço.
No adulating a poem. Accept it like it accepts its concrete form, concentrated in space.
Chega mais perto e contempla as palavras.
Come close and contemplate the words.
Cada uma
Each one
tem 1000 faces secretas sob a face natural.
has 1,000 secret faces under the surface
E te pergunta sem interesse pela resposta.
that ask you without interest in the reply,
Pobre ou terrível que lhe deres.
bad or worse, that you devise.
Trouxeste a chave?
Did you bring the key?
And then there is a footnote.
Well, it's the final stanza.
Repara, ermas de melodia e conceito, elas se refugiam na noite, as palavras. Ainda úmidas e impregnadas de sono, rolam num rio diferente, difícil e se transformam em desprezo.
Notice, bereft of melody and conceit, words still humid, pregnant in sleep, hide in the night, tumbling in a difficult river, transformed to scorn.
Cabral?
So next we go to Cabral, Yao, I'm going to pronounce it wrong again, but
No, it's good.
Yao Cabral de Melo Neto, born in 1920. I think it's a similar generation to Mira Schendel, died in 1999. Again, one of the really foundational modernist radical poets of Brazil. And we'll first read one of them anyway in Portuguese, and then I'll read a couple in English.
And Cabral, just to situate him better, he was a diplomat, and he had this really illustrious career. And he was a very close friend with Clarice Lispector, who's someone who's kind of her books are being translated now in English, and she's kind of back on stage. Psicologia da composição. É mineral o papel.
Well, I think read the whole one, and then I'll read mine.
Okay.
Yeah, we're not going to do it line for line. He's going to read the whole poem.
É mineral o papel onde escrever o verso que é possível não fazer. São minerais as flores e as plantas, as frutas, os bichos, quando em estado de palavra. É mineral a linha do horizonte, nossos nomes, essas coisas feitas de palavras. É mineral, por fim, qualquer livro, que é mineral a palavra escrita, a fria natureza da palavra escrita.
So this is a wonderful poem to read in this room with the idea of the paper and the inscription on the paper as being mineral. This translation I did with Horacio Casto and Jesus Bonvicino, and after the published translation of Dejal Kadir. It's mineral, the paper, on which to write verse that it is possible not to make. Mineral are flowers and plants, fruits, animals, when in a state of words. Mineral, the horizon line, our names, those things made of words. Mineral at last, any book, 'cause the written word is mineral, the cold nature of the written word. And one other I'll read just in English of Cabral's, called The Last Poem. I don't know who sends me poetry, nor whether who would call it that. But who may be, who, myself, my sweat, be it woman, landscape, or the no that needs fill the void, to make, for example, the crutch that I made walk the left sole. To whom should I be given the inglorious burden, I ask, my last poem, sent as a poem perverse, anti-lyric, made into anti-verse. I'm going to just read now a short poem of Paolo Leminski. Leminski was born around 1940. He only lived about 45 years. And he was actually a friend of Velosso's, very involved with Caetano Veloso. So this is a short poem of his. My cut-off head thrown in your window, moonlit night, window open, hits the wall, loses some teeth, falls to the bed, heavy with thought. Maybe it's scary. Maybe you'll blink, seeing by moon the color of my eyes. Maybe you'll think it's just your alarm clock on the nightstand. Not to scare you, only to ask kindlier treatment for my sudden head departed. My close friend in Sao Paulo, Jesus Bonvicino, with whom I've worked on all of these translations, has translated a book of mine into Brazilian Portuguese, and I'm going to just read two short poems of his. The first one is called Blue Tile, in my translation, of course, from him. Blue Tile. My pa and mine ma dead. No one's. Some one. Double silence, uninterrupted. Jagged shards that now, by act of accumulation, I rejoin. And the other poem, very good to read again in this context, is called Prose. A poem can't be sold like music can, can't be sold like a painting, like a song can. Nobody gives a dime, a damn. A poem don't live beyond its words, its dark and backward suns. Can't be sold like prose can, only as if it were a story or the mocking echo of a poem. Can't be sold like junk can, chunks of mango tree in a garden or fragments of a garden hose. Vats of burnt oil, even like goldfish can, singing in a trash dump, the black tongue of the sewers where algae bloom. Can't be sold like graffiti can, like a photograph or video can, or any arty film. Can't be sold like a print or card can. Me, I'm a lousy trader in worthless things, beset by the plague of words. Actually, he's told me that when he was a young man, he met Mira Schendel, and she was very friendly to him and gave him a drawing, and he's very touched by that. So what I'm going to do next is, with Sergio, is a homophonic translation, which is a kind of translation in which I'm going with the sound of the Portuguese rather than the lexical or paraphrasable meaning. So it's a translation of a Regis poem, Mi Transformo, and we'll read the. We'll go back and forth. You'll understand.
Me transformo. Outra janela, outro que se afasta e não se reaproxima.
Me transformo out of vanilla. Outro. Hey, see a fast A. Hey, neo so re a proxima.
Nas desobjetivações, nas linhas e realinhamentos, outros me atravessam.
Not days objective cues, A. Reactivate cues. Not line has to realign mementos. Outra, me a traveling man.
Morto de ser, coisas perdem sentido. Expressões figuradas como ossos de borboletas.
Morty deserves cause per diem sent I do. Expressos figured as coma. Oh, so the bourbon let a.
Me transformo na observação de uma pétala.
Me transformo. Na, observe a cow, the humid petals.
Me destransformo, a mesma janela, outro que não se afasta.
Me detransform, oh, a mess, my vanilla. Outro, hey now, see a fasta.
Nas objetificações, alinhamentos e linhas inexistentes iguais me repassam.
Not objective cues, align mementos. A line has inexistent iguanas. Me, re, pass em.
Retrato desativado, taxidermista de mim mesmo.
Retract, ode, sat, I've do, taxidermist of mine, mess, more. I'll take some of your water. We'll go backwards now. Haroldo translated a poem of mine about translation, really based on a set of questions that a Chinese translator asked me about my work. So the poem is filled with quotes from different poems of mine and his questions about what they mean. And Haroldo translated this whole poem. I'm just going to read a few stanzas from it and just a very little bit in the Portuguese. many people have told me who read the Portuguese that it's much better than my original English poem, so I'm quite delighted by that. Because of his commitment to transcreation, I think he found this poem very interesting because it's about the kind of drift involved with translation. So I'm going to read, in this case, my original English, and then you'll hear a little bit of the Portuguese, but not that much. What do you mean by rashes of ash? Is industry systematic work, assiduous activity, or ownership of factories? Is ripple agitate lightly? Are we tossed in tune when we write poems? And what or who emboss with gloss insignias of air?
O que você quer dizer com impinges de cinzas? Indústria é trabalho sistemático, uma atividade assídua, ou alude à posse de fábricas. Encrespar é agitar levemente. Nós entramos em estado de transa quando escrevemos poemas. E que ou quem gofra com glossas lustrosas insígnias do ar?
Is the fabric about which you write in the epigraph of your poem an edifice, a symbol of heaven? Does freight refer to cargo or lading, or does freight refer to cargo or lading carried by pay by water, land, or air? Does it mean payment for such transportation or a freight train? When you say a commoded journey, do you mean a comfortable journey or a good train with well-equipped commodities? But then why do you drop the A before slumberous friend? And when you write in Why I Am Not a Christian, you always throw it down, but you never pick it up. What is it? In the harbor of illusion, does vein refer to a person's vein under his skin, or is it a metaphor for a river? Does lot mean one's fate or a piece of land? Does camphor refer to camphor trees? Moreover, who or what is nearing? Who or what has fell? Or does fell refer to the skin or hide of an animal? And who or what has stalled? Then is the thoroughfare of Noon's atoll an equivalent of the template? In No Pastrami, this is the whole No Pastrami poem that he's referring to, Walt, I'm with you in Sydney where the echoes of Mamaroneck howl down the outback's pixelating corridors. Does pastrami refer to a highly seasoned shoulder cut of beef? Is Mamaroneck a place in the U.S. where wild oxes howl? I take it corridors refers to the passageway in the supermarket. Could I read the poem as the speaker is doing shopping in a supermarket in Sydney? He is walking along the eccentric passageways among the shelves on which goods are placed. He does not want to buy the pastrami, as he seems to have heard the echoes of wild oxes howling in the U.S. while he addresses Walt Whitman.
So I'm going to read just this last stanza. Em Não Temos Pastrami, Walt, estou com você em Sydney, onde os ecos do berro do Mamaroneck, ao longo dos corredores abilolados dos cafundós de Judas, será que pastrame se refere a bem condimentado corte de bife de boi? Será que Mamaroneck é lugar nos Estados Unidos onde bois bravios berram? Devo entender que corredores referem-se às passagens no supermercado? Posso ler o poema como o sujeito que fala está fazendo compras no supermercado em Sydney, está caminhando pelas excêntricas passagens entre prateleiras nas quais os produtos estão dispostos, não quer comprar pastrame, uma vez que lhe parece ter ouvido os ecos dos bois bravios berrando nos Estados Unidos, enquanto ele se dirige ao Walt Whitman.
Just a small part of the poem, which is published in my way. Jesus and I wrote this poem together for Arkady Dragomoshenko 2006. It's called Definitions of Brazil. Brazil is a jungle with snakes and cakes. Brazil speaks Lebanese, Portuguese, Japanese, Guaranese, Chupies, Inglese. Brazil is an adulterating melody of intoxicated syncopations. Brazil has no relationship with itself because it has a relationship only to itself. Brazil lays its cool hands on your hot head. Brazil was colonized by Indians who turned the Portuguese into natives. Brazil's Tolstoy is now doing tricks in a favela. Brazil is a land of palms and psalms. Brazil is the model of a model. Brazil is a charm bracelet that has become the necklace of the continent. Sao Paulo more European than St. Paul. Brasilia more bureaucratic than Geneva. Rio more alluring than Boca. They've got an awful lot of coffee in Brazil. In Brazil, the cuckoo sings, Macau, Macau, Macau. Brazil is private property of no man's God and no woman's fury. The patron saint of Brazil is its dreams, just as its devil. Brazil is a carioca, not a polka. Brazil is Carmen Miranda's Tutti Frutti hats, Caetano Veloso's all-weather tropicalismo, Bebel Gilberto's number on the charts. Brazil is the Elias and Tom Waters of March International Airport and Spa. Brazil is Caparina with feijoada, Capira with fedora. Brazil is the home of the cassava or tapioca, what you call yucca, or mandioca, or apim, or mugo, or mascara, or singakong, or tugi, or balinghoy, or maniac. Brazil is the black mark of the PCC inscribed with the words traitor, betrayer. Brazil is 186 million stories, 186,000 poems, but only these definitions. Put your stocks in Brazil and your bonds in China. Or is it the other way around? Brazil is a figment of the imagination of the Amazon. If Pelé is the poet laureate of Brazil without ever writing a word, then Ronaldo Gaucho is its Nijinsky without ever having set foot in the Ballet Russe. Brazil is not emerging, it's proliferating. The official religion of Brazil is not just samba, but macumba and umbanda, tarantella and caracasco. Candomblé is the Brazil wood of world philosophy. Brazil is Fred and Ginger flying down to Rio with Dolores del Rio. Under the veneer of its vivacity, Brazil is violent, a vile piper playing a violent viola. In Brazil, anything goes for a chance, for a price, for a piece, for a dance, for a fight, for a night. Jetino Brasileira is born free, but everywhere in chains. Brazil's face never shows its heart, even when they are identical. Brazil stars Bob Hopkins, Jonathan Pryce, and Robert De Niro. Brazil was written by Terry Gilliam and Tom Stoppard. Brazil is concrete and syncretic. Brazil is impenetrable and forgiving. Brazil is cannibalizing and carnivalizing. Brazil is a Baroque barcarolle with a bossa nova beat. Brazil's Lulu is a little loco, but not as loco as Lucy. On Ipanema Beach, at the very moment when dusk turns to night, you can hear Orpheus singing for Eurydice. He sings an elegy called Brazil. In Brazil, the real is the only currency that counts. So we do the Ashbury?
You want to do first?
Okay.
Yeah.
So Sergio and I thought end with a tribute to John Ashbery, who died a couple of weeks ago. And this is a piece...
Who went to Brazil in the 90s.
What?
He was in Brazil in the 90s.
Was in Brazil in the 90s? Okay, didn't know that. And this is a very short poem of mine that I wrote the night that he died and have dedicated to him. It's called If Sappho Were a UFO. If Sappho were a UFO and I were a genie, we dance on the surface of Pluto and dine at Ipanema Beach in Rio. Nothing much else glues me to this shredded fabric of the marvelous, on sale all these years, with no buyers and just 3 authorized sellers. I'd made it almost to Mars, then went home. Too much mud in these parts. And I missed the smell of home ground, even if it turned out to be imported.
Nice. So we're going to finish with this poem that I translated. It's a poem by Wally Salomão, who for me was sort of one of the biggest voices in Brazil of the Tropicalia generation in the 70s and 80s. And he passed away just a few years ago. He actually became Minister of Culture during Lula's first government. He was a giant. And a few years ago, I translated a few of his poems, and I was very happy to find this one that is called Open Letter to John Ashbery. Memory is an editing island. Any passerby says nonchalantly, and immediately turns off the key and erases the meaning of what was meant to be said. The eye exhausted, we are left with the wonder of the word not being wiped out yet. Where and how to store up the color of each instant? Which trace do we retain from the translucent dawn? Must we incinerate the dry wood of burnt-out friendships? The perfume, perhaps, of a faint rose? Life is no screen, and it never acquires the strict meaning that we wish to press upon it, nor it is a story in which each minutiae hides mores. It is filled with dumping sites, corpses, executions, missing archives, hijackers, deleted excerpts, lost originals, death squads, and blown-out protocols. Does it matter if ashes rest cold or still burn hot? If an adequate urn is not selected, be it Greek or barbarian, as repository? Before tomorrow pours itself here, today we already have forgotten what brings today's watermark. Hyenas lurk in the bushes while time's mastiffs make an archipelago out of the threads from memory's jacket, eyelets, shredded images of finished days, numerous ozone craters, family ties cut loose, hollow and carrier and ditch and prosthesis. Thus the word gives birth to the deceased of its own synopsis, without final explosion. Nulla dia sine linea, no day without a line. One without a name and of weak will summons this axiom as a barrier against entropy. Days pass, and the intention is affirmed to transform all poison and rust into a piece of paradise, or vice versa. At the pleasure or convenience, like pushing a button on an editing island, and the god erupts at last to redeem human fame. Correction, human fate. Thank you.